Well, after looking at a number of different options, I decided that we would go ahead with this book on dealing with depression. Um, for multiple reasons, which I outlined in my note to you earlier in the week. I think it's the kind of topic that if you're not experiencing depression now, be thankful for that and be filled with the joy of the Lord. But there may be at some point where you feel very upset about something, even depressed, and so it would be helpful to have some preparation for that and be able to know how to work yourself out of that if need be. So I think the book will be helpful to that end. I don't know how you can get through life without having some experience of depression, or at least tremendous sadness and sorrow from time to time, with various different troubles of life that we do not hold to a triumphalistic view of life where we just go on from victory to victory and nothing but joy and happiness along the way. There are seasons of doubt, seasons of despair, and times of grief, and so it's important that through all of this we look to the Lord and find the help that He provides us. When I thought about this, I was mindful of my own preparation for the ministry. When I was in high school, I began reading a book by Dr. J. Adams called Competent to Counsel. And the argument that he was making was that pastors are, in fact, competent to provide counseling services to the members of their church. They have all that they need to minister to the spiritual needs of their people. And that was an important point to make in our modern age, where it seems that counseling has become a specialized work of the therapist and of the counselor, the psychologist, working out of an institution, maybe in a mental institution. And so if you have somebody that's dealing with certain problems, the thing to do would be to send that person over to the experts. And what Adams said was that, not to deny certain gifts that people have, but pastors have all that they need in the Scriptures to provide counsel for God's people, to help them through the various issues of life. Dr. Adams was not opposed to an expertise developed in counseling people. He was himself a counselor. He was not opposed also to medical treatments and care for people in that way. But he noted that there is an important role that the pastor has. And that got me thinking. I had a book on my shelf that Bob Minnick had recommended some time ago, and I bought it myself, by E. Brooks Holyfield, on the history of pastoral care in America. And I just read the first handful of pages or so in the book, and it talked about the beginnings of pastoral care in the early church, and how there was a tremendous interest on the part of pastors to provide answers to members of their congregation dealing with all the different kinds of problems of the soul. And so there was a good deal of arguments about this and that, what would work from Scripture, and over the course of the years, Christian theologians developed quite an ethical analysis of different things. And in time, it got to be so commonplace that all these prescriptions from Scripture were known among pastors that it got to the point where nobody seemed to be coming up with anything new. And some got frustrated with that. That's always a dangerous thing. Can be a dangerous thing. The human nature is basically the same from the time of the fall of Adam and Eve. It's like I say, it's a nature that is controlled by sin, and sin has its manifestations in all kinds of things: anxiety and worry, fear, depression, despair, all kinds of things contribute to the spiritual maladies of the human heart. And so these have been with us since, if you will, the beginning of time. And human nature basically hasn't changed. There might be changes in terms of the applications of that to our modern society, but the basic core problems are remaining the same. And he talked about the different approaches that Christian theologians have had over the years, dividing it up between Roman Catholic, Anglican, Lutheran, and Reformed approaches. And if I have time, we'll talk about some of those different ways of dealing with issues. But I just wanted to emphasize the role that the pastoral ministry has in addressing the issues of the heart and of the soul. So with that in place, we'll take a look at this opening chapter by Dr. Ed Welch. He is a faculty member at the Christian Counseling and Educational Foundation, which is located nearby in the Glenside area. And I've made use of that institution from time to time when I've had people that I've been related to in my church with different issues that I felt were more complicated than what I had time to address, and I referred them over to there. And they have had a long-standing ministry for many years. Dr. J. Adams was the one who, I think, began that effort. And it's been not only a place where Christian people can get counseling, a God-centered, scripture-based counseling, but also it's a place where the counselors have done a lot of writing on a variety of different topics. Between Adams and Welch and Paulison and some of the others there's been a tremendous effort to educate the Christian church on issues of counseling. So if you happen to have somebody that's in need, you might want to consult with that counseling center. So he begins with the path ahead, and if you look at the introduction to the book, or the table of contents, he has 3 chapters that orient us to the topic of depression and helps us to begin to thinking about that. And then he begins to analyze what depression is about for us so that we can understand what's going on. He described it generally as suffering and different aspects to that suffering. And then he begins to kind of develop tools for analyzing or for, what would you say, detecting the particular form of depression that an individual is dealing with. And so he talks about the importance of listening to depression. So depression, as he'll state in this opening chapter, has many different aspects to it. It's a very complicated thing, and it's not easily understood or remedied. And so there is tremendous importance to listening to what's going on, to make sure we have properly understood the causes of the depression, and then begin to address it in a focused way. He talks about other things that provide help, and there is a chapter on medical treatments. So while we're going to talk a good deal about the religious side of addressing depression and other issues, it's not saying that that's the only way to deal with things. It's not denying that there are physical ways in which we can be drawn into a depression. It's not denying that medical treatments could be helpful. So we'll look at that a little bit and other aspects of providing other help. And then they'll have some concluding comments on hope and joy as essential for the future. So with that, we'll get started with the first chapter, And I'm sorry for my father. I don't know what I'm going to be able to do here. Dad, please be quiet. Please be quiet. I have to wait here for a bit. I told you. I have a Bible study to lead. I've mentioned that before, so please just be patient and let me do my work. All right? So we're looking at the first chapter, and he begins with a quote from Dante, which is probably not the first person you would think about in terms of what the nature of depression is. I imagine this is from Dante's Inferno. And he writes, "In the middle of the journey of our life, I found myself in a dark wood, for I had lost the right path." And that quote kind of gets us started in terms of orienting our minds to what happens to somebody when all of a sudden they just seem to be lost. And we'll find that the feeling of depression is kind of a feeling of lostness, of emptiness. And so he says, when you are depressed, how can you take a step, let alone a journey? When all vital energy is devoted to staying alive and just making it to the next hour, how can you add anything else, like hope, to your day? These are the how-to questions that, in the face of depression, seem almost impossible to answer. Pages of homework and practical suggestions could indeed fill many books, but they are unlikely to make you feel alive. What you need must go deeper than practical advice. You don't need a series of how-tos. In fact, you could probably write a credible list of how-tos yourself. You already know many things you could do, and you have probably done some of them. So right at the start, we're confronted with the thought that it's a quick reaction to see someone depressed and just talk to them about some quick remedies that could get them out of the depression. And so there are things to do that can help. Go out and watch a movie. Go out and have a night on the town. Just get out of yourself. Get out of your problems, whatever. You know, we might be quick to recommend something without really understanding the depths of the depression and really the causes of depression. To give an analogy, I was thinking of somebody who might have a fever and a cough, and well, you give them an ibuprofen for the fever or an Advil, and then for a cough you get them some cough medicine, and you think, well, they should be getting better. It turns out they don't get better because they have pneumonia. And just by trying to treat the surface symptoms, you have ignored the cause of the problems, and that allowed the problem to get worse. You needed something more significant. You needed an antibiotic to address the core cause of the symptoms. And so, similarly, in addressing depression, we shouldn't be content just to find out how to get out of it. That's treating the symptoms. It's important that we address the core cause of things, out of which arises the depression. And by addressing the core issues, then we can hopefully have a better outcome. He writes, depression and the host of feelings and thoughts that get crammed into the word plead for a why. First, why is this happening to me? Then, why love? Why work? Why worship? Why believe? Why live? Why bother? The depressive heart resonates more with vanity of vanity, all is vanity, than with 101 steps to combat depression. A list of how-tos can't speak to the issues of purpose, hope, and the fundamental questions of existence and belief that depression inevitably raises. It's not surprising that while Prozac is being heralded as the cure, philosophers are also finding a niche in helping those who are depressed. So philosophers deal with worldview issues, and core questions about existence. And well, I think the philosopher is not really going to provide good help because he operates out of a humanistic base, a man-centered base. At least the philosopher is recognizing that there's more involved than simply the surface problems. So he continues, so on the path ahead, look for a partnership between the whys and the how-tos. When the why questions appear, they will be religious, as all why questions are. They will be about God. Depression, of course, does that. It takes you back to the basic questions of life. Ignore them to focus on the how questions, and you might find a temporary shortcut to mental relief, but your heart will still be famished. So it's not sufficient to just go out and get drunk or go out and watch a ball game or something like that. You've got to deal with the core issues that are generating the feelings of depression. Those core issues are the engine behind the depression that's manifesting itself in life. And that engine, the heart, really needs to be addressed. So he says the basic idea, depression is a form of suffering that can't be reduced to one universal cause. This means that family and friends can't rush in armed with the answer. Instead, they must be willing to postpone swearing allegiance to a particular theory and take time to know the depressed person and work together with him or her. What we do know is that depression is painful, and if you have never experienced it, it's hard to understand. Like most forms of suffering, it feels private and isolating. I think this is part of the challenge of dealing with people on a personal level, people that you know who are depressed. Sometimes in addressing issues of depression, you have to ask some pretty personal and deep questions. And it might be rather tough to ask those questions of your wife or your child or what have you, and to persist in trying to unlock what's behind these things. And your wife or child might have something of a wall up to protect themselves from you because they value your opinion or whatever, or really don't want to share everything with you.
You a lot of times.
And so so it might be helpful to go to a counselor and find have the counselor address those things and be able to ask more personal questions in an atmosphere where your partner may feel more free to express themselves without the implications involved in the impact of those things on others within the family. So are there right emotions? It is common for spiritually mature men and women to feel depressed, to think that they are doing something wrong.
What's the world need?
Excuse me.
We haven't eaten all.
Dad, we just had breakfast, right? You're lying to me. You just had a breakfast, and I offered you milk to drink and cookies. I gave you something to eat. So please.
I don't have no money, Lord.
Please be quiet.
Please let me.
No. Wait until I'm finished. When I'm finished, we'll go out.
Please.
Yes, when we're done. You need to be quiet and let me do my work. So are there right emotions? If you're depressed, you're probably thinking that you've done something wrong and you're wondering, what is it? And so we need to look at that a little bit. He continues, after all, Scripture is filled with words of joy and happy hearts. When they aren't feeling happy, they feel that they must be missing something, or that God is punishing them until they learn some hidden lesson. So as part of the psychology of the depression, you're wondering, what have I done wrong? Why is God punishing me? What do I have to learn from this experience so that I can get out of it? And those are all good questions, part of the analysis that you have to go through, but things can be rather complicated. He continues, on earth, however, God doesn't prescribe a happy life. Look at some of the Psalms. They're written by people of great faith, yet they run the emotional gamut. One even ends with, darkness is my closest friend, Psalm 88, verse 18. You should read that psalm. It's a very tough psalm to read. It begins with the psalmist crying out to God for help and explaining how he was feeling. And it does end in the New International Version with the statement, darkness is my closest friend. So it's quite a challenging experience. He continues, when your emotions feel muted or always low, when you are unable to experience the highs and lows you once did, the important question is not, how can I figure out what I've done wrong, but it is, where do I turn, or to whom do I turn when I am depressed? Some turn toward their beds in isolation, others turn toward other people. Some turn away from God, others turn toward Him. So depression is going to challenge your heart, and it has ramifications for the course of your life, particularly in your relationship to God. Does it prompt you to turn to God for His help, or to reject Him, to turn away from Him? The consequences are very significant. Here's a way to proceed. If you are depressed, the chapters that follow are intended to be brief and at times provocative. If you want to help someone who is depressed, the chapters are intended to give you direction and to be used as actual readings you can share with the depressed person. My hope is that the book will encourage partnerships between depressed people and those who love them. Suffering is not a journey we should take alone. There are too many places where we are tempted to give up, and too many times we can't see clearly. So if you are depressed, read this book with a wise friend. If you want help, ask the depressed person to read it with you, or select particular chapters to read together. I think that might be a little bit more preferable, just to look at particular chapters that would be especially pertinent to a certain situation. So, but I think it's a good way to stimulate discussion, develop ideas, and to work together on something. So, the journey of a pilgrim. You will encounter a number of images in the coming chapters, such as darkness or light, numbness or vitality, and surrender or waging battle. Most prominent will be the journey of a pilgrim. Whether we sense it or not, we are walking a path that always confronts us with a choice. Each day we stand at a crossroads and make decisions of significant consequence. Instead of heading out on a trek, the idea of heading out on a trek is not a pleasing thought when you are depressed. But at least you are in good company, which should offer some comfort. Beginning with Abraham, God has called people to leave a familiar place, set out in a new direction, put the past behind, face unknown hazards, get to a point of desperation, call out for help, and look forward to something or someone better.
Please.
I'm sorry.
When you do that, I work with you all the time. And you do this to me.
Please sit down. Please sit down.
I want to be with you.
I told you already that I'm leading a Bible study. You need to respect that. You understand?
Yeah.
You need to sit and wait until I'm done. All right?
Right.
When I'm done, I'll take care of you.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So please honor my work.
All right.
So the image of a pilgrim is an important image for us in dealing with depression. It's certainly an image that's, well, it's been with the Christian church for quite some time, for centuries, since the Pilgrim's Progress, written by John Bunyan. But it's a description of the Christian life. We're on a pilgrimage. We're journeying towards the celestial city. And as we make that journey, there are many different choices along the way. Pilgrim's Progress can be a very good example of that, where a pilgrim had all kinds of choices before him, to the right and to the left. And every day we are called upon to make a choice for following God or living in disobedience. And so the idea of a pilgrimage through life is an important concept. Well, here comes Bill. How about that? So now Dr. Welch quotes from Origen, one of the old Christian theologians in the early years of the church. I think he was probably around 300 or so A.D. In any case, Origen, an old saint of the church, offered this encouragement. "My soul has long been on pilgrimage," quoting from Psalm 119, verse 54. And Origen comments, "Understand then, if you can, what the pilgrimages of the soul are, especially when it laments with groaning and grief that it has been on a pilgrimage so long. We understand these pilgrimages only dully and darkly so long as the pilgrimage still lasts. But when the soul has returned to its rest, that is, to the homeland of paradise, it will be taught more truly and will understand more truly the meaning of what the pilgrimage was." That's from a homily that Origen wrote. And he was right. On this side of heaven we walk by faith and don't have all the answers we would like. But there is reason to believe that you will find certain hopes fulfilled even on this side of paradise. Sometimes people have used the image of life as a tapestry, and when you are looking at a tapestry, if you're looking at the underneath side close up, you find all kinds of threads sticking out and all kinds of things that don't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And that is a picture of life in this world, where we experience different things: trials, troubles, sorrows, despair, triumphs, victories, and joys as well. And it just sometimes seems to be modeled together, and threads here and threads there, and you wonder what the sense is to it all. But heaven is like being able to turn that tapestry over and seeing the whole thing and its arrangement, and seeing the beauty of the plan, and seeing how all the different colors, the darks as well as the bright colors, all come together to form a beautiful mosaic, a beautiful picture of our lives. And that gives us a challenge to have faith in God and His sovereignty over us in the course of life, knowing that He has the overall plan in mind, and He understands all the ways in which different things work together in our lives. And so while we look up at the underside of the tapestry and we question why and wherefore, God understands it all, and He has a beautiful plan in mind, which He will reveal to us at the right time. When we pass from this life, perhaps we'll see reasons for it as we go along this life as well, so it's not all left to the future. We do have some glimpses, some interpretation of it given to us in Scripture here. But as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, we see through a glass darkly in this life, but then face to face. So there will be a great revelation for us in the future to come. So that introduces the book for us a little bit. The next chapter gets into how depression feels, and that's a pretty depressing chapter to go through, because it'll give you a sense for what people are feeling as they deal with depression, and it's a very difficult thing. And it's more than we can handle, I think, this morning. So I'll just finish up here, I think, particularly in view of the challenges that I have here, and see if you have any questions or comments or thoughts about the book itself. Is this something that you want to pursue and continue? Would you like to look at something else? We can always make a change if that would seem to be desirable, but I think this would be a helpful book. Maybe one thing that we can do is kind of pick and choose our way through the book too, to deal with things that would be most pertinent to us. I thought Bob had a great point earlier, talking about the way that the world is very much given over to kind of depression, and it affects the way the world lives. And just as Mike was drawn to a text of Scripture, I also thought about Romans chapter 8, where the Apostle Paul says that the mind of the sinful man is death, but the mind controlled by the Spirit is life and peace. And there you have these core issues of the mindset of the natural man who is outside of Christ, outside of God. His mindset really promotes death, and everything that he does has the odor of death about it. I mean, you think to me, it seems that we have this illustrated on grand scale in terms of our politics today. Every solution is being provided by those who are anti-God, anti-Christ. It is a solution that's bringing greater harm to the country rather than benefit and help. I mean,
absolutely,
it's ridiculous, but at every point along the way, it seems like their purpose is to undermine and destroy the country, bringing too many people into the country through illegal immigration. When I listen to some Republicans and others complain about saying this doesn't make sense, well, it makes perfect sense. From the Democrats' perspective, they know what they're doing. This is purposeful. They're trying to undermine the country, trying to change the country and make it something where it's under their control. So, to me, what Paul says is very true. The mind of the sinful man is death. And that's underneath everything. And they try to hide that and cover that up with all kinds of things. The arts, sciences, with entertainments.
Mike has the gliders going.
Yeah, whatever, gliders.